Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. It's late evening at a busy international airport in the United States. Your plane has just landed after 14 exhausting hours in the air. Your legs feel stiff, your eyes burn from lack of sleep. All you want is a shower, a quiet room, and a few hours of rest. But before any of that can happen, there is one final step between you and the outside world, the immigration line. You stand there slowly moving forward, passport in one hand, phone in the other. Eventually, your turn arrives. The officer takes your passport and begins asking routine questions. Where are you coming from? How long are you staying? What is the purpose of your visit? You answer honestly, just like thousands of travelers do every day. Everything seems normal. Then the officer glances down at your hands and says something that instantly changes the atmosphere. Please unlock your phone and hand it to me. For a split second, your brain freezes. Your entire digital life is sitting inside that device. Conversations with family members, photos from years ago, messages you barely remember sending. You hesitate just slightly. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the request feels deeply personal. Still, you don't want trouble. So, you type your passcode, unlock the screen, and hand the phone over. 3 seconds. That's all it took. And without realizing it, you may have just made one of the most expensive mistakes a traveler can make at a US airport. In the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through what immigration officers are legally allowed to see on your phone, the small mistakes that can turn a normal arrival into a major immigration issue, and the 3-second rule that could protect your digital life. I'm Edward, and this is US Green Card Signal. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. It's late evening at a busy international airport in the United States. Your plane has just landed after 14 exhausting hours in the air. Your legs feel stiff from sitting too long. Your eyes burn from lack of sleep. All you want now is a shower, a quiet room, and a few hours of rest. But before any of that can happen, there is one final step between you and the outside world, the immigration line. You stand there slowly moving forward with dozens of other travelers, passport in one hand, phone in the other, replaying the long journey in your head. Eventually, your turn arrives. You step up to the counter. The officer takes your passport and begins asking routine questions in a calm, almost mechanical tone. Where are you coming from? How long are you staying? What is the purpose of your visit? You answer honestly, just like thousands of travelers do every day. Everything seems normal. Then the officer glances down at your hands and says something that instantly changes the atmosphere. Please unlock your phone and hand it to me. For a split second, your brain freezes. Your entire digital life is sitting inside that device. Conversations with family members, photos from years ago, messages you barely remember sending, maybe even private jokes shared with relatives or friends back home. You hesitate just slightly, not because you did anything wrong, but because the request feels deeply personal. Still, you don't want trouble, you don't want delays, so you type your passcode, unlock the screen, and hand the phone over the counter. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 simple seconds while you unlock that device. And without realizing it, you may have just made one of the most expensive mistakes a traveler can make at a US airport. Because in those 3 seconds, something incredibly small, something almost nobody thinks about, may have just opened the door to years of your private messages, photos, and data. A few hours later, some travelers walk out of the airport and continue their trip. Others find themselves sitting in a quiet secondary inspection room, wondering how a routine arrival suddenly turned into a serious immigration problem. And the difference between those two outcomes often comes down to details most people never learn before they fly. Hi, I'm Edward, and in this video, we're going to talk about something that almost nobody explains clearly before people travel to the United States. What immigration officers are legally allowed to see on your phone at the airport and the small mistakes that can turn a normal arrival into a major immigration issue. Every day, thousands of travelers arrive at American airports with valid visas, valid documents, and perfectly normal travel plans. Yet, some of those travelers still end up facing long secondary inspections, canceled visas, or denied entry simply because they didn't understand how border inspections actually work. The truth is that the legal rules at a border crossing are very different from the rules you experience inside the country. Many travelers assume the same protections they hear about in everyday life apply the same way when entering the United States. In reality, airports operate under a unique legal framework that gives border officers broad authority to inspect belongings, including electronic devices. And that's where things start to get complicated. In this video, we're going to break down 5 critical mistakes travelers make when interacting with immigration officers, especially when it comes to smartphones and messaging apps like WhatsApp. We're going to look at what official border policies say about searching electronic devices, what information officers are actually allowed to access, and why something as simple as how your phone is configured can make a massive difference. We'll also talk about one of the most misunderstood issues travelers face: the difference between the rights of visa holders and the rights of permanent residents when they arrive at a U.S. port of entry. And of course, we'll come back to the question that started this entire story: the 3-second mistake that can quietly expose far more of your digital life than you ever intended. Because the most important time to understand these rules isn't when you're standing at the counter in front of an officer. It's before you ever board the plane. To understand why a simple phone unlock can suddenly become such a serious moment at the airport, you first need to understand one of the most misunderstood legal realities about entering the United States. Many travelers believe that the constitutional protections they hear about in everyday life apply exactly the same way at the border. You've probably heard of the Fourth Amendment, the rule that says government authorities generally cannot search your personal property without a warrant signed by a judge. Inside the country, that protection is powerful. Police officers can't simply stop you on the street, grab your phone, and start scrolling through your messages without legal justification. But the moment you arrive at an international border crossing, the legal environment changes in a way that surprises many people. Airports, seaports, and land border crossings operate under what's known as the border search exception. Under this doctrine, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers are given much broader authority to inspect travelers and their belongings as part of the country's responsibility to control who and what enters its territory. That authority includes the ability to search luggage, documents, and, in many cases, electronic devices without obtaining a warrant beforehand. In practical terms, that means the normal expectations travelers have about privacy don't always function the same way when you're standing at an immigration checkpoint. And this is where the first major mistake often happens. Some travelers believe the best response to a request for a phone search is to challenge the officer on constitutional grounds. They might say something like, "You need a warrant to look at my phone," or "You can't search my device without probable cause." While those statements may reflect how people understand their rights inside the country, saying them in the middle of a primary inspection booth almost never ends the conversation in your favor. From the officer's perspective, arguing legal theory during a routine inspection can quickly raise suspicion. Instead of a simple 2-minute interaction, the situation may escalate into something called secondary inspection, a much longer and more detailed examination. Understanding the border search framework doesn't mean travelers have no rights, but it does mean the rules operate differently than most people expect. This brings us directly to the moment we started with, the 3 seconds that most travelers never think about. Imagine again that the officer asks you to unlock your phone and hand it over. You type your passcode or use facial recognition. The screen lights up and you pass the device across the counter. That interaction happens quickly, often automatically. But during those few seconds, there is one step that many people forget entirely: disconnecting the phone from the internet before handing it over. The reason this matters has to do with how modern smartphones store and retrieve information. Today, a large portion of what we think of as our phone data isn't actually stored entirely on the device itself. Photos, emails, messages, documents, and app content are often synchronized with remote servers through cloud services. Messaging platforms like WhatsApp, for example, may store backups or historical conversations in remote accounts linked to the phone. Under internal policy guidelines governing electronic device searches, officers conducting a manual review are generally expected to focus on information that exists locally on the device. But here's the complication. If a phone is actively connected to cellular data or airport Wi-Fi, when an application is opened, the device may automatically begin retrieving additional information from remote servers. An inbox refreshes, a message archive loads, a photo album synchronizes. Within seconds, the device screen may display information that was not originally stored on the phone at all. This is why many experienced travelers follow a simple precaution sometimes described as the 3-second rule. Before handing over a device, they quickly swipe down and activate airplane mode, which disables cellular connectivity and usually turns off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as well. That step limits the device to the information physically stored on it at that moment, instead of allowing apps to continuously pull additional data from remote accounts. It takes only a few seconds, but it can significantly reduce how much information is immediately accessible on the device screen. The key point here is not confrontation or refusal. It's understanding how technology behaves in real time during an inspection. Now, let's talk about the app that shows up in these situations more than almost any other: WhatsApp. Many travelers feel completely comfortable handing over their phones because they believe their messages are protected. After all, WhatsApp is famous for something called end-to-end encryption. It sounds like the ultimate shield for privacy, and in many ways it is extremely effective, but only in a very specific context. Encryption protects messages while they are traveling across the internet from one device to another. It prevents outsiders from intercepting those messages while they move through networks. But once that message arrives and appears on your screen, encryption has already done its job. At that point, the message exists in plain text on the device itself. Anyone physically holding the unlocked phone can read it exactly the same way you do. That means the moment a traveler unlocks their phone and hands it to an officer, encryption is no longer the protective barrier many people assume it is. And here's another important point many travelers misunderstand. Officers conducting inspections are not only looking for evidence of criminal activity, they are often looking for something much simpler: indications that a traveler's stated purpose for entering the country may not match their real intentions. Immigration law places heavy importance on something called intent. When someone arrives at the border using a temporary visa, such as a tourist visa, they are expected to follow the conditions attached to that status. What it does not allow is working in the United States without authorization or secretly planning to remain permanently. Because of this, officers sometimes review digital conversations looking for statements that contradict the explanation a traveler provides at the inspection booth. Imagine a traveler arriving on a short tourist visit who tells the officer they are staying for 2 weeks to see family. But during a phone review, an earlier conversation appears in which that traveler asked a relative about helping find a job while visiting. Even if the message was casual, exaggerated, or misunderstood, it can raise questions about whether the traveler intends to follow the rules of their visa. This is why phones can become unexpectedly powerful pieces of evidence during border inspections. Photos, notes, travel plans, conversations with relatives, all of these digital fragments can paint a picture of someone's intentions. This leads to another area where confusion is extremely common: the difference between the rights of visa holders and the rights of permanent residents. Travelers entering the United States on temporary visas are asking for permission to enter the country each time they arrive. That means the burden is largely on them to demonstrate that they are admissible and that they intend to follow the terms of their visa. For visa holders, that possibility makes interactions at the inspection counter particularly sensitive. Permanent residents, on the other hand, are in a fundamentally different position. Someone with lawful permanent resident status has already been granted the legal right to live in the United States. When permanent residents travel abroad and return, they are generally considered to be coming back to their home rather than requesting permission to enter as a visitor. Because of that status, the government cannot simply deny a returning permanent resident entry for declining to unlock a device. However, if a permanent resident refuses to provide access to a phone, officers may choose to retain the device for further examination. At this point, you might be wondering what actually happens after a traveler hands over their phone. The answer depends on the type of search being conducted, because under current border procedures, there are generally two different levels of electronic device inspections. The first is commonly referred to as a basic search. In a basic search, an officer manually looks through the device using the phone's own interface. They may scroll through photo galleries, glance at recent messages, open certain applications, or review visible files. But there is another level of device examination that operates very differently. This is often called an advanced search, and it is far more comprehensive. Instead of manually scrolling through the device, officers connect the phone to specialized forensic software designed to extract large amounts of data. Because advanced searches are so intrusive, internal policy guidelines generally require a higher level of justification before this type of forensic extraction takes place. By now, you can probably see that the biggest problems at airports rarely come from dramatic situations. Most of the time, they come from small misunderstandings, tiny details about technology, behavior, or immigration rules that travelers simply never learned before boarding their flight. So let's bring everything together into a simple preparation strategy you can follow before your next trip to the United States. The first step is taking a careful look at your digital footprint before you even leave for the airport. The second step involves how your apps are configured before you land. Many experienced travelers choose to log out of certain social media or messaging platforms before reaching the immigration checkpoint. The third step brings us back to the moment we discussed earlier, the 3-second rule. If an officer asks you to unlock your device, take a brief moment before handing it over to activate airplane mode and disable wireless connections. The fourth step is understanding your legal status before you ever reach the inspection counter. And the final step is something that sounds simple but carries enormous weight during any inspection. Maintain composure. Clear answers, consistent travel plans, and calm behavior can keep an interaction routine rather than turning it into an escalating investigation. Smartphones have become extensions of our lives, holding our conversations, our memories, our plans, and sometimes even our frustrations. But when you cross an international border, that same device can suddenly become a window through which authorities try to understand your intentions. Knowing how those inspections work doesn't mean assuming the worst about every airport interaction. Millions of travelers enter the United States every year without any problems at all. The key difference is that informed travelers understand the environment they are entering and take a few simple steps to protect themselves. If this video helped you understand what really happens at U.S. airports, please subscribe to U.S. Green Card Signal so you don't miss future updates. Share this with any traveler you know who's planning to visit the United States. This information could save someone from hours of secondary inspection. I'm Edward from US Green Card Signal, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay informed, stay protected.